So we're going to talk about three sections now, all around building credibility, looking at accreditations, and we're just going to start with exclusions. And if you have bid before, you're likely either in the selection questionnaire or in the ITT, the invitation to tender, you will have seen grounds for either mandatory exclusion or discretionary exclusion. And it's worth understanding these before you bid. There's a list on the screen that you can read through. There is a definition for other offences, which is not particularly helpful. It's a definition in law. But what is, I think, meaningful, and one of the things we wanted to bring up today, there is a proposal from the government to investigate the feasibility of developing a central debarment list, which in effect would act as a list of disqualified suppliers. And it would principally be a list of suppliers that have been disqualified under the mandatory exclusion grounds, although there is some talk that that could be developed further to include some of the suitable discretionary exclusion grounds. Now, in principle, that would be helpful to contracting authorities because it would ease the burden on those individual contracting authorities to understand where people are. It does, however, also, I think, promote consistency. And consistency in application is often a problem. And when it's a problem, it can really bite. So as a business going into the bidding space, it's worth understanding these mandatory exclusions, but it's also worth having an eye out for the central debarment list if, in effect, it does go forward under the new regulatory environment. Duncan, do you want to add anything to mandatories before I move on to discretionary?
Thanks, Gillian. I think what I would just add there in terms of mandatory exclusions across the UK public sector, most organisations when they're going out to tender, certainly for high value contracts, is actually the mandatory exclusions will probably be the same. So once small enterprises, businesses, charitable organisations have actually, got their head round the selection criteria, how they are presented, it should actually become quite straightforward moving forward. So say, for example, you're responding to a tender opportunity from Wakefield Council, the mandatory exclusions would then probably look the same if you're responding to an opportunity from Kirklees Council. So I think it's really important that organisations don't view the mandatory exclusions as a barrier, because actually a lot of those generic things that are on screen now around terrorist offences, money laundering are applicable. Yes, you may see some mandatory exclusions that are developed that are contract specific, but certainly don't let the mandatory exclusions put you off from tendering, because, as I say, they are consistent and they are applied across the sector.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Duncan. In terms of discretionary exclusions, you can see on screen some examples of what would be an exclusion ground from a discretionary basis. Some things to note, I think, the current discretionary exclusion grounds for past poor performance, that's been proposed to be broadened to include a wider range of instances that could be taken into account. And also there's a proposal to implement a system to require contracting authorities to evaluate contract performance specifically based on a set of key performance indicators. And the results of that could be then published or held on some sort of central database. Now, KPIs are not new. They've been around since forever. You should always know what the KPIs are that you are likely to be judged on before you take the contract out. Those things shouldn't come as a surprise. You should know how you're going to be measured from a performance perspective, and especially if those things are contractual. And contract management isn't a new concept in procurement, but it is, if I'm being brutally honest, as a procurement professional, there's real degrees of how well it's done and how it's applied, and it is often done differently organisation to organisation. There is a real growth area in contract management, actually, for that to be much more consistent. So the Cabinet Office are doing lots of training around contract management. As a small business who has worked for the public sector, contract management can be a really positive and helpful and useful process to go through. It shouldn't necessarily be perceived as the stick. that someone should beat you with in terms of performance. Of course, if there are performance issues in that contract, then those things should be worked out. But this largely should be a very positive environment for both the contracting authority and the provider to that organisation. And it should not be full of surprises whatsoever. I think one thing that I want businesses to be aware, and I've seen this so many times, I've been approached as a small business myself to do it, some procurement teams, and usually the less experienced, so this is very rarely, if ever, something that's done as a known entity, but you might get asked to write something like a specification for something that will ultimately then go on to be competed. That can sometimes slip through the net and catch a provider out. If you write a specification, effectively what you're getting is unfair advantage. And it's really difficult then for that to be competed fairly. So there's a bit of an acid test for me as a small business. If it's just me that's being asked to do something, then I might question it or seek some advice around it. But if the invitation that I'm being given is open to lots of people or all of the market, then generally it's fine. So things like market engagement events or pre-market engagement exercises where you might be asked to fill out a document, because they're going out to anybody who wants to fill them in, there's literally no problem with that. But if somebody says, actually, will you help us write the specification for this classroom fit out or this new build over here or this service, then I would probably take some advice before you do it, because it can just end up being a conflict of interest in a way that you never intended it to be. Also, the government is proposing to simplify the selection stage, and I'm expecting lots of businesses to hear that and go, hallelujah, that would be great. There's something called the Tell Us Once project that the Cabinet Office are running. But basically, if there is a central platform, it would do a number of things. It would reduce duplication, as suppliers would only submit your information once. And then for selection criteria, contracting authorities could apply selection criteria to that centrally held information when selecting suppliers. So it could actually, if that actually happens, that could provide some real benefits to both the public sector and to the market. But there's this measurement that we talk about a lot, and there's lots of measurement for businesses working in the public sector all the way through the processes, from selection right the way through to contract management. And one of the things that Go for Growth is doing is encouraging debate with the public sector around actually how would the market measure your performance as a contracting authority? How are you to work with? Small businesses have got very little time. So actually, as part of the planning process, and we really encourage this planning process, how might we choose who we want our customer to be? How might we choose who is good to work for? And there are some mechanisms for measuring stuff. So, payment times are a known and traditional measure of performance in a customer. But we're really starting the debate in terms of, should this measurement be much more reciprocal? And it's a question I'd really like to open to Duncan in terms of your own view on measuring framework providers or contracting authorities as customers. Do you have any thoughts on if that should be more reciprocal, and if so, how that might look?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the way that YPO operates as a framework provider, we don't have any mandates, so in terms of organisations wanting to work with YPO, they'll actually work with YPO based on the credibility of us as an individual organisation. So we actually put a lot of emphasis on the pre-procurement phase, where we actually engage with organisations, and if we were looking at exclusion, for example, how we engage with the supply market, how we engage with customers to enable us to actually put those solutions together. And obviously the ultimate measurement for us as a commercial business that's owned by the local by the public sector, local authorities within there, it's the value of spend that we've got under management in terms of our solutions and things like that, so we win or we lose by the quality of our deliverables, and I think that's how we're measured.
Okay, that's good, thank you. And is that true of all contracting authorities, do you think, in terms of the uptake is a measure of how successful the procurement has been?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk, certainly from the public sector buying organisations, industries. If you look at all their websites, if you listen to all their collateral put out, so CCS, the central government buying organisation, they have very, very public growth figures that they're looking to deliver, i.e. spend under management through their solutions. There are other local authority buying organisations similar to YPO, the likes of ESPO and NEPO, who operate in the North East and the Midlands respectively, and they have spend under management figures. There are also private sector organisations who deliver services for the public sector, working in partnership with contracting authorities who are public sector organisations in their own right, and they're also quite vocal in terms of the solutions that they offer, the social value that they deliver, quoted in monetary terms, and the spend under management. So ultimately, yes, spend under management is a measure, but equally for us at YPO now, we're on a programme where a lot of our measurements is actually around the value that we offer, the support that we give to our customer organisations, how closely we work with suppliers. We're doing a lot of the work at the moment around supply chain risk. It was interesting you mentioned there at the start of the presentation, Jill, the seminar, around we need a period of stability, but at the moment we've got a massive period of instability. So the work that YPO is doing through its procurement teams, understanding the impacts, being able to support our individual organisations through our customer base to help them navigate through those impacts. Hopefully that's a measurement that will run alongside just the value of spend that we've got.
No, that's really good to know. I wonder if, and it's really just amusing, but I wonder if the public sector will do more surveying in terms of asking the audience a little bit in terms of how those, that value feels from a marketplace perspective. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out, I think, going forward.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of jump in, I think, we need to do more of it. And actually the interesting challenge for all of us in public sector, with the financial pressures that we're facing, not just the impact of COVID and not being political in any way, shape or form, but, I started my career at YPO in 2010 on the back of the first round of public sector austerity. So for the last 10, 11 years, against that backdrop of austerity, we've seen headcount reduction, that impacting on the delivery of public services. It's getting that balance right between the delivery and then doing all the contract management activities that you alluded to that allow you to engage and to understand those impacts. So, we have to do more of it, but I think the challenge for us is going to be against that balance of the post-COVID financial impacts and obviously the unsettled world that we're currently living in.